Welcome to today's video workshop. Today I'm going to explain a little bit about the setup that I'm in right now. This green screen studio space, actually one of 8 on campus, and by extension also a green screen studio space that we can set up in our computer lab in Warhol. The idea of this workshop is to introduce you to the correct setup of such a space, including the lighting, some of the things you need to be aware of when shooting in a green screen studio space. And then in the second part of this workshop, techniques of chroma-keying, which means taking one color, specifically this green background color here, and making it transparent so that we can start compositing and composing with different video sources, making them interact visually together in our video frame. But let's take a quick look at this studio space here first. This is one that is available to all of you as part of this class. And we can maybe begin with a little tour that shows you the green screen in the background here. In fact, I've set up one of my own cameras in the back here that will show you a little bit more of the space than just this crop view that you usually get with my video tutorials or these video workshops. We also have a lighting setup in here that is fairly nice. It mimics a 3-point lighting system with fill lights, with key lights coming from the front, left and right. There's actually some main lights in the back here as well. And then there's also a highlight right on top here that gives a little bit more of a definition of the person that is actually being recorded in this space, specifically on the back of that person's head, on the shoulders, making that person stand out a little bit more in front of the green screen and making it easier for that person to be keyed later on in the post-production process. We can actually replicate some of these settings in our Power Studio space, and I will show you exactly how to set up the lights there. If you're using one of these Video Express studio spaces, that's what they're called, you can actually just enter the space and follow some of the directions. They are posted right here on the door. We see a quick image of those right now. And following those, you basically turn on all the equipment. The lights are already mounted for you, and you are ready to shoot within 5 minutes or less. You're also welcome to bring in your own video camera. That's what I did today with the camera back here that's recording part of this workshop. And if you like, you can also bring in your own props. You can bring in your own lights if the setup is not suitable to your needs. Now I wanted to show you quickly the camera setup in this space. You already see the camera is mounted right here, right in front of you, and it records everything that is going on behind this speaker desk right here. You see the result of the camera recording in real time on this little monitor here. And there's also monitors on the left and on the right-hand side of the room that give you some visual cues about how you're doing in front of the camera. You also see that I'm wearing a little microphone. The sound that you hear is being recorded together with the video. And what is very nice about this is that the video is going to be posted online, and as soon as you log out of the system and the video has been compiled for you, there will be an email sent to your email account and you can download the video. You also see right here in front of me a large screen that you can use to show slides, for example. This is, after all, set up for PowerPoint presentations and for online courses. So it takes a little bit of some tweaking in order to hack the system to make it fit your needs. So usually I'm not going to use this. There's another little screen right here that allows you to set different backgrounds, and I can do that in just a second. I can turn the background off. This is what you see right now. And you can actually choose from a variety of background images. White is the most neutral, and then there's probably 10 different images from around campus that are all very cheerful, but probably not what you want to use for your projects. You can turn the background on like this, and now you can see behind me already, these are the slides that you can load onto the presentation computer that will show in this little window box behind the presenter. And you can also turn this to a full screen view, where now you see the full desktop of this big screen in front of you being superimposed or being inserted right behind you, and the keying process Basically getting rid of the green and putting myself in front of the computer image is happening in real time. So you can experiment with this and, for example, create a slideshow of sorts, or even bring in a QuickTime video that you can play behind you on that screen and interact with it in real time as a kind of a real-time performance setting that some of you might find interesting. I will now turn off the background images again and just work with my green screen, since we may actually want to use some of this footage in just a little bit on the computer as well, and actually try to remove this green color and turn it into a transparent background ourselves within some software tools in the Adobe Creative Suite.
I'm in the screen view, and you can already see the folder with the files that we're going to use in our workshop today. This folder is an unzipped version of this zip archive that you can download from the link that is posted in the comments section of this video. And it includes the source files for the 3 projects that I would like to guide you through today. You can see the final compositions for each of these projects in the final compositions folder. The first project will be a simple green screening chroma-keying project using a sequence from the Introductions project by LaBeouf, Rönkkö and Turner, in combination with an Andy Warhol painting, a weather map that Andy Warhol painted in the 1980s to create an alternative weather forecast of sorts. The second project is a slightly more advanced compositing project in Premiere, where we also need to go into Photoshop and take a look at how to prepare some still images. And then the third project deals with track mats, basically still image components that can be used as stencils for video layers that can be superimposed or composed with other video content in your final project. So let's get started and open up Premiere Pro. We can actually use the compositing folder that in this case is on my desktop as the project folder for all 3 projects that we're going to work on today. So I click on New Project, make sure that the compositing folder on the desktop is set as my project folder, and give this first project, Chroma-keying, a name. And now I can import the files, the source files for this first project. I make sure that I'm in my project folder, and then I can simply double click into this area that says Import Media to start. Go to the compositing folder again, and I select the Introductions double.mpeg4 file and also the Warhol weather map file. You can hold down the Command key while making that second selection, and this is also how you could select multiple files, more than 2 files at once. Click Import, and in order to create a new sequence, I actually use the Warhol weather map still image as a starting point. So I take this image and drag and drop it onto the new item icon at the bottom of the window, which creates a new timeline, a new sequence, which I can rename. Right now it has the same name as the source file that I used in order to create it. So this is chroma-keying _ sequence. And you see that in that sequence I already have my still image file incorporated in the track V1. You also see that the duration of this can be changed, duration of the still image file, by using the selection tool and then just grabbing the endpoint and stretching it out. The default duration of this is actually set by a setting you can find under Premiere Pro, Preferences, General, Still Image Default Duration. Mine was set to 5 seconds, but you can change that, and then the next time you import a still image, it will default to that duration. Alright, now after I created this sequence, if you like, you can actually check the sequence settings just to make sure that it's our standard 1080p HD definition sequence with the right settings for our sound and frame rates. So with the sequence selected, this blue area around it, you can go to Sequence, Sequence Settings, and then double check these settings, which look very nice. In fact, it's a 1920 by 1080 frame resolution. We have square pixels, 29.97 frames per second, and a 48 kilohertz soundtrack to go with that. All right, so let's introduce also Shia LaBeouf that will be used in the foreground. And what we need to do is actually get rid of this green screen background from the original footage and make it transparent. This is what chroma keying is all about. We basically choose a color hue in our composition and turn it transparent so that other image content from layers beneath it can actually show through. And I do this with an effect that is called Ultra Key. I go to the Effects panel in my project window, and then rather than finding it in these folders, sometimes I actually forget where it is exactly located. I just use the search field and type in Ultra, which reveals the path to that effect. So it's in Video Effects, Keying, Ultra Key. I take the effect from here and drag and drop it onto the green screen layer, so onto the introductions layer. And if you like, you can even, already crop the time of the Warhol layer, trim this to the same duration as the introductions layer, and then if you like, zoom in temporarily a little bit more so you can actually preview things maybe a little bit more easily. All right, I have the Ultra Key effect applied to my introductions double layer, but you don't really see that anything has changed in here. So in the next step, what we need to do is we need to actually fine-tune and tweak the settings of this filter, of this effect. We do that by double-clicking onto the introductions double layer, the layer that we just applied the Ultra Key effect to. And then in the source window, we go to the Effect Controls tab, and this will give us access to all the different components that we need in order to set a nice key color and then fine-tune the chroma key effect that we just applied to that. So what I do is I take the eyedropper tool from the key color, and then I move it over into my image area and click on an area that is a slightly darker shade of the hue, a slightly darker shade of the color that I would like to turn into a transparent background. I can hold down the command key, and you see that temporarily while I hold down the command key, the little color picker puffs up. And that allows me to, rather than sampling only one pixel, the chroma or the hue aspect of this one pixel, it will allow me to sample a 5x5 area of pixels, so giving me a more averaged kind of chroma response from the color that I'm sampling. So you can see then clicking into the green area will already give me a pretty good initial chroma key effect that now I can fine tune a little bit more. You see there's still some corners here where we see the original background kind of shining through. But we can now fine tune this effect much more to get a really good keying result from that. I do that by going back to the Ultra Key effect, and under Output I switch from Composite to Alpha Channel, and this will give me a really nice preview of the areas that are going to be fully opaque, basically all the white areas here that you can see, and the areas that will be fully transparent, which is the background, all the areas that are black right here. The goal of the fine-tuning of this filter is to get all the areas that need to be opaque, all the white areas, as solid white as possible. So trying to get rid of some of these shades and shadows that are in here. And the areas that need to be fully transparent in the background, that need to be fully black, we want to get them as black as possible, getting rid of some of these highlights that we still see in there. And this is in fact the first thing that we do. So we go to the matte generation selection of settings, and under highlight we try to get rid of these highlights as much as possible. So if we set this all the way down to 0, already takes care of some of them, not too many in this case, but we'll get back to that in just a second. Now we actually want to get the whites as solid as possible. So we use the transparency slider here. Try to do that. And that doesn't matter that we actually get a little bit more highlights temporarily in the back here, because we can balance this out with the pedestal slider at the very end. And this basically takes care of the blacks in the background. So this is a very nice keying result already. We see that there's still a little bit, it looks like there's a little bit of a shadow in here. So we can try to experiment with the shadow and see how that actually even gets, you know, removed as well in this case. So this is a very nice chroma keying result. We have the background solid black and we have the silhouette of the person in the foreground solid white. It's good to kind of scrub through the material, just see if there's maybe any other element in here, any other frame where this these keying settings don't really work so well. But it looks like we got pretty lucky here and we don't really need to adjust them. If you had to do that, you would just basically start with the transparency first, try to make sure that your silhouette is as white as possible, balance that out with the pedestal, and then fine-tune it a little bit with the shadow setting as well. I'm now at a good point where I can switch in the output from the alpha channel back to the composite channel. So I really only see Shia LaBeouf right now in front of that weather map. And in the last stage of this process, I would like to scale, of course, the layer so that he's not so small, or at least position him more at the bottom of the image, so that it doesn't look like, you know, his legs are being cut off and he's floating in the air. I can do these very simple image adjustments in terms of scale and position of an image layer by double-clicking into the image layer that I would like to scale or move. And then under Effect Controls, I just simply have to click on the motion properties at the very top, which immediately draws a blue outline around this layer. And I can simply drag one of these control points and make it as big or as small as it needs to be. So maybe somewhere right here, this looks pretty good. And then I can already preview this project, turn the sound back on, and it should be a fairly successful combination of different image layers already, a fairly successful keying process here.
Double-sided, minds, different paths. One runs after sunlight, one follows the rising moon.
All right, very good. If I needed to do some further adjustments, sometimes there's a little bit of some green that's still visible on the outside, around the silhouette of the person or the object that you are chroma keying. You could actually go into the matte cleanup settings of your ultra key filter and then play around with the choke, which kind of shrinks the selection down, so it makes it a little bit smaller, effectively cutting off some pixels on the outside. And you can play with the soften effect that then gives a slightly feathered or soft outline to your selection as well. We don't really need to do that. This is a very nice result already. I'm fairly happy with this. And I think we are ready that we can render this project out. So if you wanted to do that, if this were your final composition, you would go to the beginning of your video in your sequence window, press the I key on your keyboard to set an in point right there. Then holding down the Shift key, you would jump to the end, use the arrow keys to go basically to the last frame that is visible right here, and then hit the O key on your keyboard to set an out point. So now you see the whole clip is selected from in to out. I can simply go to File, Export Media again. Make sure that I have the right output name right here. So I call this chroma-keying test maybe, .mpeg4, that's my file format. Make sure that I save it back in my compositing folder, hit the save button, and then quickly go through the video settings. That should in fact all be fairly correct already here. So I have 1920 by 1080 for the pixel resolution, 29.97 frames per second progressive as the field order. The only thing I probably have to massage a little bit is the bitrate setting here. The bitrate encoding, I would always choose VBR 2-pass. And then for the target bitrate, if you want to be generous, you can set this all the way up to 15 with a maximum of 20 megabits per second for the maximum bitrate setting. This is already a fairly nice quality, probably even a little bit overkill in terms of the data throughput that you generate here. And then under audio, just make sure that you have the AAC audio format selected and 48 kilohertz stereo and 320 kilobits per second under the bitrate. And then you hit the export key and this will render out your project and will already bring it into a format that is suitable for presentation in class. So for all the other following projects, the next two projects that I'm going to guide you through, you would basically output them in exactly the same way. So I don't really need to demonstrate it then, but I'll just show it to you once right here for this first project. All right, perfect. So I can save this project one more time, File, Save, before I close down Premiere and go and check what the output looks like. So I close Premiere, go to my compositing folder and then find the chroma-keying test result right here and preview it. Just click on it.
Double-sided, minds, different paths. One runs after sunlight, one follows the rising moon.
Very good. So that's the final project and we are ready to move on to the next project. Just going to arrange the files here a little bit so that they all stay together with their corresponding source files for each of the projects. And we're now ready to take a look at project number 2. This one I actually call the Eismeer composition, and it's based on a painting by the famous German artist from the Romantic period, Caspar David Friedrich. The painting is called Das Eismeer, translated into English, the Sea of Ice, and it was created from 1823 to 1824. I found it quite interesting in that it actually places the human subject, the viewer, into this majestic landscape, as well as showing the failure of man in a very hostile natural environment. After all, we see this crushed boat here that got sunk by these slabs of ice in this very hostile environment. For me, it's very interesting to see this idea of constructed nature in there. There are some definitely interesting architectural elements in here. And in fact, contemporary artist and architect Tom Main from Los Angeles writes about this painting as well, that is highly influential for his architecture practice, showing a very dynamic relationship between architecture, landscape, and nature. So it was interesting for me to see the way that we as humans try to organize, construct, and build nature, but at the same time that this has varying outcomes and varying effects, all the way to failure and to effects of futility and effects of disaster that we create in this endeavor to shape our natural environment. So I thought it would be quite interesting to show maybe this human intervention in nature a little bit more by superimposing a person that is actually quite actively helping to construct this composition of the Arctic landscape that we see. So this is the project that I would like to create in Premiere, and I can show you already the result of what we would like to go for.
Okay, come down a little bit. Yeah, very good. All right, just a little bit more, now slow. Okay, that's it. There it is. Very good. All right.
Okay, so how can we create something like this? This composition involves quite a few different Photoshop layers that I had to prepare outside of Premiere first. They're all in this folder called Eismeer composition files. Maybe we can quickly take a look at them before we get started with our Premiere composition. Select them all and open them in Photoshop. And I would like to start out by showing you the original composition by Caspar David Friedrich. If you compare this to the image that I showed you before, the actual photo of the painting, you see that I had to crop off components from the bottom and from the top of the image in order to make it fit the 16:9 1080p frame size that we have in Premiere. The original painting was more of a 4:3 aspect ratio. So what I did was I downloaded this image from the internet and then used the image size command to scale it to a horizontal size of 1920 pixels. And then after that, I used the command image canvas size to crop the image vertically to a 1080 scanline resolution. So 1080 pixels in the horizontal resolution, which ended up being exactly this format that you see here. I then had to remove somehow this one ice slab and fill it with a convincing rendering in the artist style of the snow. So I basically used the clone stamp tool, this one right here, and I borrowed and stole some image elements wherever this slushy snow and this kind of curd, the snow curd, was occurring in the original image, and started to compose with that and filling this area where the original ice slab used to sit. So the new background, my altered background, looks something like that. I also had to separate the ice slate, which is the one that is being lowered by the imaginary crane driver that I'm giving these commands to and directions to. So that's one image layer. And then I also had to separate the foreground and the midground from the background image in order to be able to place myself into that Arctic landscape. For example, I knew that in the video recording suite that I used, in the green screen suite that I used, I wasn't able to record my feet. So I had to crop off my legs at some point, and it was quite convenient then to use the foreground to do so. The midground is used, and you can kind of see this little cutout here, in order to wedge this ice slate quite convincingly into that composition. So we'll go right into that midground wedge in here, into that cutout shape, so that we convincingly recreate this original composition that you see here. So quite a little bit of some work in Photoshop. If you are wondering how, for example, I was able to separate the foreground from the background, making the back of the image transparent, I actually used this tool right here that I've already selected, the polygonal lasso tool. It's actually the second one in this group here. So you just hold down the mouse, select that tool, and then this takes unfortunately a little while, but what I did was I very slowly and deliberately created an outline around these foreground elements in the actual painting. And then simply after I created this selection and I closed it, going around all the way here, I simply deleted the background, everything that was not selected, by inverting the selection, going to select inverse right here. It's not right now highlighted because I didn't create this selection right now, but that would allow you to select the background and then getting rid of it and creating only one layer, foreground layer, with the foreground elements that you see right here. The same I had to do with the midground, only I didn't have to be so precise with most of the image. Just wherever the ice slab was going to be settled in the final composition, this is where I had to pay attention to my actual selection. Alright, so let's get out of Photoshop. And let's also start a new project in Premiere. I again use the compositing folder in the background here as my project folder. So when the welcome screen appears in just a second here, go to new project, and I make sure that I have the compositing folder selected. It's on the desktop, compositing, choose, and then I give this a name, call this project Eismeer composition, and hit OK. Now I need to get my source files into the project window again. So I click on project Eismeer composition, double click into the import media to start area, and get my media files from the compositing folder that you downloaded as part of the zip archive. I need to get my Eismeer composition files from this folder right here. And I could just select that folder and import it. I would get an error message with this PowerPoint file that's in here. Can't use PowerPoint files in Adobe, but it might be an interesting little presentation that has some more information about my process and some of the thoughts about this project in there as well, if you want to go back to that. So I just select all of these files in here with the exception of the Eismeer. I still hold down the Command key to select multiple files. And I also need to select a file from the AVCHD package right up here, which is a bundled package of all the video files that were on the video camera when I recorded this green screen setup. So I need to open this package. I use these arrows to open up the package contents, and then in stream it is the video file called 0001.mts that I command click and also add to the selection that way. I hit the import key, and now it actually asks me for all of the Photoshop files that actually have a layer content, just one layer, what I would like to do. So I just say OK for all of these. If you had more than one layer, you could select individual layers, for example, but for now just leaving this at merge all layers is actually fine. So these are my source files, and now what I can do is I can start constructing the image, reconstructing the image, the Caspar David Friedrich painting in Premiere. So what I will start out with is the actual background image, the background layer. So I take this and I start creating a new sequence by using that and dragging and dropping that again onto the new item icon here, and immediately after I did that, renaming the sequence to something a little bit more easier to remember, or a little bit less confusing than CDF background. Alright, so I can already stretch this out a little bit because I know that my video file is much longer than just 5 seconds, the initial duration of that still image. I create now, after I have the background, I bring in my foreground. In fact, what I need to do is I probably bring in the midground first. Let's do it that way. Also create this, make this a little bit longer. Then I bring in my foreground like this. Right now everything still looks fairly much the same as it did before, but you can actually see what these individual layers are doing by temporarily switching off the visibility of the other layers underneath. So if I switch off the visibility of the midground layer and the visibility of the background layer, I can only see the foreground layer right now in video track V3. I can do that with the midground as well. So this would show me the midground, and then of course the background is covering the whole frame of my composition. This is a good starting point, and in fact for compositing with that now, I should turn off temporarily the midground and the background, so I really only see my foreground, because I would like to place myself now behind the foreground. So this means actually the layer immediately underneath the foreground needs to be my video layer from the green screen environment. So what I do is I take that foreground layer and I just push it up one more track, and you see before there wasn't any track here. So I just quickly undid that action. Just by pushing that up, you can create a new video track, which is quite helpful. You could also go to sequence and then say add tracks right here, but you know, just pushing the track up is actually relatively easy as well. All right, and then I need to grab my 001 MTS file, and I need to wedge it right in here in the track V3. So it looks like this. I'm already behind the foreground of my Caspar David Friedrich painting. You see there's still a little bit, you know, some camera movement going on. I look into the camera. It's not very convincing in the beginning. So I should probably crop this to right here, having this as the starting point. So I take again the selection tool, go to the beginning of my video track in V3, the green screen footage right here, and then just drag this so that it magnetically jumps to that playback head here. And then the same with the end point as well. So right here, this would probably be a very good end point. And then just move this over so I can then start compositing with that. You also see something interesting going on here, which is that I'm actually, if you double check the original painting, the original Caspar David Friedrich, I just double click on that. See that? If you compare these two, I'm actually pointing in the wrong direction. So I'm pointing from the right hand side of the image to the left, rather than actually later on being in the image down here, pointing from the left hand side to the image to the right. So what I need to do first is I need to actually flip my image layer horizontally, which means I need to find a little effect from the effect tabs that is in the video effects section under transform, and it's actually the one that's called horizontal flip. So even if you wanted to, you could just type in horizontal and it would actually show this to you as well. I take this and I just drag and drop it onto my green screen track. You see how it immediately flipped that from the original direction. I undid the effect quickly to drag it back on there, the new direction from the left to the right. This is already a very good starting point. In the next step, however, I need to start with my chroma-keying effects and basically make the background transparent and also create what is called a garbage mat around myself so that I get rid of the light, I get rid of these monitors, the board right here, some of the screens, so that really only the area of me that is in front of the green screen is visible and all the other things are already being removed from the image content. So I do that by clicking on the layer, double-clicking on the layer, bringing this up in the source window, and then going to Effect Controls. This is before I even apply the Ultra Key effect to it. And so in fact, it's now probably helpful to also make the background temporarily invisible, so I can continue with my garbage mat all the way down to the floor. And then, as I said, double-clicking on this layer, going to Effect Controls. In the Effect Controls, if I go to the opacity settings, I open up these settings, I can select the Free Draw tool. And then with this tool selected, I can start drawing a little garbage mat around myself in this case. I don't need to be too precise here at the bottom. This will be cut up anyways or covered up by the foreground. And so I just, with as few control points as possible, I try to create this selection around myself. I do have to, unfortunately, now make sure that I don't move outside of this selection at any given point in here, which in effect I might have been, very, very lucky. There's maybe one little finger that gets cropped off here, so I can just take this and just move this out just a little bit more. Maybe even, getting a little bit closer here in the back. If this was already too close here, now I'm almost cutting off my head here, so just fine-tuning this a little bit and trying to already get as close as possible to my actual outline that I would like to use in the final composition. So this is already very good. Alright, so now in the next step what I need to do is I finally can apply my chroma-keying effect or my ultra key effect to this layer as well. So I go back to the Effects tab in the project window, type in Ultra, which brings me to the Ultra Key setting, Ultra Key effect, and then that one I drag and drop onto video track V3. double click on that video track V3 so it opens up in the source window again, just to be sure that it's the right video track. We already have quite a few in here, so you don't want to actually apply the effect to one but then work with the effect controls of another one, or wondering why you can't find the ultra key effect. So just make sure that it's the right video track up here in the source window. Go to the effect controls, and then we apply this ultra key effect the same way we did before, by basically choosing the key color first. So we go to the color picker and then choosing a key color right here in the background that is as dark as possible, or is one of the darker shades of that green. And I use my command key again in order to sample an area rather than just using the chroma value of one of these green hues that you see. Alright, so this is my first result from the key color selection. You see there's still quite a bit of some highlight here in the back, and the first thing what I'm going to do is I immediately switch the output from composite to alpha channel, so I can see a little bit better all the white areas that I need to get as solid white as possible, and then all the areas around me that I need to get as solid black as possible in order to make them transparent later on. So here you will see, if I go to the highlight and start with getting rid of some of these highlights, this will be quite effective. I type in 0 here, and this already creates a very nice, almost very solid black area around me. Now there's just some of these shadows that are left here in the back that I need to take care of eventually. Before I do that, however, I also see that there's a couple of artifacts in the white silhouette, so I use my transparency slider, try to get rid of them as much as possible. So like this looks pretty good. And always remember that this was a very bad setup, initial setup in the green screen recording space. So there were lots of wrinkles in the fabric. There was lots of stuff that needed to be cleaned up around the actual person, around myself, and lots of light changes. And so I'm actually fairly amazed that we can work so well still with this material in this ultra key filter. And then finally, in order to get rid of these guys here, the artifacts in the black area, I experiment with the pedestal value. You see I can get them fairly decently reduced to almost like just this little shadow area right here that I can try and get rid with the actual shadow key, the shadow setting right here. So this looks very good. What we see with this material, however, is if I zoom in a little bit, that we somehow have this really weird, it's almost like an extra line that starts forming around the silhouette. And so now I can definitely go into the matte cleanup selection here and then experiment with the choke. Yeah. So something like this, and also experimenting with the soften effect, something like this. I do get actually some of these black spots in there that are not so nice. So maybe in the effect, since in the end this effect might not completely get rid of all of these, and we have to see how it will actually look like when we switch back to the composite channel and when we actually scale this person into the composition. But this might be a good starting point already. So I go to the output and select composite right here. And now I need to turn on the visibility of all these layers that I have turned off before. So the foreground comes back in, now my midground comes back in, and then in the end the background is right here. And the last step for placing myself into that landscape, I just need to move that layer over a little bit to the left, and I also need to scale the layer. So I double click into video track 3, which is the layer with myself on there. Go into effect controls, go all the way to the top and select the motion properties, which creates this selection box around the layer. I can now grab one of these corners and in this case scale myself down, something like this, and then move myself into an area right here, I guess at the corner of this composition, left hand side frame of the composition, So I turn the sound off for a little bit so I can just quickly scrub through it without hearing too much about it. But you can already see this looks very convincing, and in fact, since the person is so small right here in this composition, we don't really see this double line in some parts around the silhouette anymore, so it kind of disappeared in this final composition. Alright, the final step of this whole project is to keyframe in the movement of the layer of the ice slate that is actually coming down from the top of the composition. And so I can do that in the next step. First, trim the excess length of the still image layers right here. And then I bring in the project, the CDF ice slate layer. And so I just drag and drop that in here on top of everything actually. So if I move my playback head, so it's right here. You see that it is okay, but since it sits on top of everything, it doesn't really go into that nice little cutout shape that I created with the midground. So in fact, what I need to do is I need to put the ice slate right in between. In fact, just move it out. I would need to put it right in between myself and the midground. So I move all the layers before that, the foreground, the layer with myself on there, up one layer, and then take the ice slate layer and put it right in here, which now makes it fit quite nicely into that. In fact, sorry, not yet. So the midground needs to be moved up as well and needs to go behind the midground, and now it actually fits very nicely into that cutout shape. So I also trim this, basically make it a little bit longer so that it matches up with the duration of all the other ones. The nice thing is that I already know now where the ice block needs to settle at the very end of this animation, of this keyframe animation, where it's going to be lowered down from the top of the screen. And so I need a little bit the sound right now. So right when I say it's good, then that's the point where it needs to settle into that position.
A little bit more, now slow.
Okay, that's it. So this is the part where it needs to sit already in its final position. This I will use as my first key point, the keyframe that I actually set in this animation, and then I work my way backwards to the very beginning where the ice slate is actually moved outside of the view, outside of the frame, where it's then, if I play this back, it will actually appear to float down or being lowered into that composition. So how do I do that? I need to double click on the ice slate layer, which is in V2 right now. Double click on that. Then with this I go to Effect Controls, and I need to open the motion controls because I need to start setting keyframe. So enable the keyframe or animation property of the position setting of this layer. So I do that. I click into that little stopwatch icon which says Toggle Animation, turns it on, and my very first keyframe is already being set. So this diamond-shaped icon that you see in your timeline up here is representative of that moment in time where I put my playback head and that position of the ice slate in the actual composition. What I now need to do is I just need to move backward in time, and somewhere where I say move it down, somewhere here, this is maybe where it should start appearing in the frame. So even thinking a little bit about this thing traveling out of the view, outside of the frame for a little bit before it actually comes into view and before it then settles down in that little gap here. So if I want to do if I want to move it out of the frame right now, what I need to do is I need to specify the position in time, which is right here, and I also need to specify the new position of that layer, which I can do by changing the vertical position right here. So I move my mouse over this number and then I just slide that to the left, and that allows me to move the ice block out of view right here until it's completely gone out of the frame. You see that automatically, because I changed the time and I changed the position of this layer, it automatically created a new keyframe for me. And now I can just play that back and see what it looks like.
Okay, come down a little bit. Yeah, very good. All right, just a little bit more. Now slow, slow. Okay, that's it. There it is. Very good.
This is already very good. The only problem I see is that it's very mechanical, so it's very linear in terms of its speed, at which the ice chunk is lowered from the top of the composition. So what I would like to do is I would like to fine-tune, or like to experiment a little bit with the acceleration and deceleration of this layer, and especially in its movement across the screen. And I can do that by opening up, by actually going back to the position property that is keyframe, that is animated, and clicking on that little triangle. And it will allow me to access this motion graph right here, which shows me a speed of 0, this bottom line, and then it shows me a linear speed of a certain amount of pixels per second, I guess, and then it shows me a speed of 0 again. What I would like to do is I would like to create more of a kind of a motion curve with an acceleration in the beginning, where it feels like the slab is coming down at a much faster speed, and then a gradual deceleration at the end. And I can do that by specifying these individual points in here. I can actually change the temporal resolution here as well, giving me a little bit more access to these settings, like this. And you can already see that just by clicking on any of these two, you will see a little handle that is being created. And now taking this handle, you can actually start to modify this curve. So you can modify it from something that now starts at a very high speed, and the closer we get to the end, it's actually slowing down until it reaches a speed of 0 at the very end. So we can see what that looks like already.
Come down a little bit. Yeah, very good. All right, just a little bit more. Now slow, slow. Okay, that's it. There it is. Very good.
All right, and so I just feel that it stops maybe a little bit too late. So I already say that's it before it actually has hit the ground. So I can interactively just grab that keyframe, the last one, and maybe move it a little bit forward and just see that last little part a little bit here.
Slow, slow. Okay, that's it. There it is. Very good.
Okay, and so this is how I navigate my way through the timing and through the animation. I have now this very nice accelerated effect in the beginning, a deceleration at the end, and it is coordinated with my voiceover as well. And I feel like this is a very successful composition in the end. So again, I'm ready to render this out. I would go to the beginning of this, hit the I key, go to the end of this, use my arrow keys to see the last visible frame, and then hit the O key there, go to File, Export, Media, and then work my way through the settings that should all be in very good shape already for exporting this as an HD 1080p composition. I can now also save this one more time and then exit out of Premiere and start working with the last set of source files to show you a little bit the processes involved in using track mats and the effects you can create with that. And then go into the finals compositions just to show you a little bit what I mean when I talk about track mats and this idea of creating stencils that you can use in order to combine video files as well. The first one is a fairly simple example that goes back to the source files that I got from archive.org, where, if you remember, maybe from project number 2, one gentleman was drinking milk, and immediately following this clip of the person drinking milk with a person working out, a bodybuilder, the idea was created that by drinking milk you would strengthen your body and you would build your muscles. Rather than showing both of them temporally separated, so starting with the person drinking milk first and then showing the person working out, you can show them at the same time, maybe creating a similar kind of psychological response in the audience to that intervention. So this would be one way to do that, by basically splitting the screen into two halves with a diagonal. right. You can also take it one step further and you can create a track mat and use that to have one clip show through maybe only in the letters of a word, in this case milk, so like this. Or you're not limited to text only, you can use any kind of shape that has transparency information that you create in Photoshop and then use that as a stencil or use that as a track mat for your videos in Premiere as well. So like this. So as you can see, these are all different ways to express somewhat the same idea or similar ideas, and it would be up to you to choose the appropriate method for your individual projects. Nevertheless, I wanted to show you how to use some of these more composited shots as well, and how you would go about creating files that you can use in Premiere and in Photoshop for this kind of an effect. Go back to my source files and start a new Adobe Premiere Pro project. We use the compositing folder in the background again as our project destination. So when the startup screen appears, we choose a new project. We make sure that it's saved in the desktop compositing folder. And this time I call this milk. Say OK. And I will import immediately my files. So in the project folder, I double click where it says import media to start. I go to compositing and then import files from here. So I need now I need to check a little bit, the brain transparent file. And I hold down the command key again to choose multiple files. I choose the lens drayer file. I choose the milk file and the milkman file. So these 4 files I will need right now. Go to import, get them in here. Since there's a couple of Photoshop files as part of this project, it asks me again what I would like to do since they have layer information. Since they only have one single layer for each file, I can basically say OK with all of these. And I can now start compositing with these files. So what I would do is I would need to create a sequence first. And I will start out with my milkman file. Take this and drag and drop it again on my create new item icon at the bottom of the project window. This creates a new sequence that I can rename right away. So this is my milk sequence. And I can zoom in temporarily a little bit to have a better temporal resolution. I turn off the sound since we've heard that background music quite frequently now already. And what I need to do now is I need to also drag and drop my lens drayer file in there right on top of the original milkman file. So right now you can see that they cover each other up, these files. But if you remember the first video that I showed you for this project, I basically wanted to set up a diagonal in here. And on the right hand side, I would like to show the bodybuilder, Lance Dreyer, and on the other side, I would like to show the gentleman from the 1950s drinking his milk. So I can do that by setting up a new garbage mat pretty much for the top layer, which is in V2, which is pretty much what we did for project 2 in order to create a kind of a selection around, or kind of a garbage mat around the green screen footage to get rid of some of the components that were hard to key or that were actually not green at all. So I double click on this file, it opens it up in my effect controls, and I go again into the opacity setting, open up the opacity, and I just draw my curve around the file with my slanted corner already. So I start here, effect, start a little bit more here, down there, over to the top, somewhere here, and you have to kind of click inside of the image, and you can adjust that, of course, in just a second, in order for the point to be accepted. So now I would like to actually take this point. Don't want to actually work with the handles to turn these points into Bezier curves, so I still want to keep them actually as rectangular as possible. So like this. Oops. Sometimes a little bit hard to do that. So that would be one. Bottom looks good, and then this one. I don't want the Bezier curve. Somehow it does that right now. There we go. This looks a little bit better. Okay. Good. So this is my second video, and now all that I need to do is I need to space out the videos temporarily a little bit more. So I can move the person drinking milk over to the left, and I can move Lance Dreyer, the bodybuilder, over to the right a little bit to create a more balanced composition of these two. If you are ever interested in further shaping these masks, you see that there's a little bit of some a feathering going on, some softening of the edges. If you want a completely clean edge without any kind of softening or any kind of feathering, you can do that in the mask when you go to mask feather. And you see right now it's set to 10. If we zoom in a little bit here, 150%, so you see this is a little bit feathered. So if you crank this down to 0, you will get a very straight line, as you can see here. So this is kind of up to you, and maybe just a little bit of some feathering is nice, so that you don't just have a little bit of some anti-aliasing in there. Make this fit, and so now we just need to move Lance over to the right and the gentleman with the milk over to the left. So we start with the bodybuilder with Lance, click on that layer, click on the motion properties in here, and then just move that over like that. All right, and then the same, actually in fact it just moved up a little bit. Can also do it a little bit more precisely down here, so if I undo that, I really need to only move things horizontally, so I can move my mouse over the horizontal position and then just slide that over. And then the gentleman with the milk, do the same thing, double click on that, go to effect controls, open up the motion property, and then this time I move him over that way. Alright, so I can play that back. And you see very nice drinking and the muscles, and you create this idea that there are probably certain kind of health effects, or maybe even some supernatural health effects if you want to, by drinking your milk every day. So that is one example. So let's move on more to the examples that use track mats and more interesting visual effects probably. We start out with the same composition by taking the milkman first, putting that footage in here, putting Lance Dreyer on top like this, and then on top of that I use the milk.psd file. So if you double click on that and just take a look at this in your source window, you see that it's a white text on a transparent background. And I can go in just a second into Photoshop and show you exactly how the transparency looks like in there, and maybe even how to create files like that in Photoshop. So, but for now we just want to take this file and put it on top. So if we look at this composition, it will look like that. And the idea is that in the end we will just see the milkman in the background. We will see Lance Dreyer on top, but only wherever I have the white of the milk letters. And this is now something that's called a track mat, and it has been used frequently in video production tools, from After Effects mostly to now also Premiere and some other image post-production tools that you can work with. So this effect is again in the effects panel, and rather than trying to locate it, I just type in track mat. So just by typing in track, it will already show up the track mat key, which is in the video effects keying folder again. Now I take this and I drag and drop it onto the Lance Dreyer file, onto the Lance Dreyer layer in the V2 track. Nothing yet happens because I also need to fine tune that. I need to specify which one is actually the track matte and which effect you want to use with that. So I double click on Lance Dreyer on video track 2, bring that into the bring that into the source window, and then go to effect controls. And in here I have my track matte key. And now the only thing what I need to do is I need to specify the matte for this effect. And what I want to specify for, remember I applied this to the Lance Dreyer layer. So the matte that I need to apply is actually the milk.psd file in video track V3. So what I need to do is I need to go and say video 3, and that will immediately apply this and merge the milk layer and the Lance Dreyer layer together, so that now the final composition looks something like that. So this has more maybe of an advertisement kind of aesthetic to it. Definitely quite interesting how now only through the letters of the word milk we can see the second layer. And then finally, just to show you that you don't always need to use text only, if I get rid of the milk layer right here and then drag and drop the layer from the project window, which is the brain transparent layer in here, it will also create an effect that's even more nuanced, because we have certain transparency areas of maybe 50% transparency or slightly more nuanced kind of transparency effects that are going on. So if you play that back, you'll see that now the idea, of course, is that by drinking milk, what's happening in the brain is this person is actually thinking about becoming this superhuman with, you know, the bodybuilder's muscles and with that, you know, certain kind of body shape. All right, so this is how you would do it. The important thing is just to remember that in the layer that you would like to use as the video layer for the stencil, you would have to apply the track matte key to, and then the layer that you would actually like to use as the stencil, so in this case the brain or before the milk layer, this needs to be a Photoshop file that's prepared with transparency settings. And so let's quickly go into Photoshop, take a look at what these files actually look like. I select both of them and open them up in Photoshop. They are again set up to be 1080p, so 1920 by 1080 in size. Here you already see the first file that's called milk, and it's basically just some white text on a transparent background. So if you want to create something like this, you would basically create a new file, say file new, set this to 1920 by 1080 pixels. The resolution should be 72 pixels per inch, and you would like to let's see, background contents, you would like to start out with a transparent background like this. Say OK, and this will create an empty transparent file, and then you can use the text tools and write, you know, your text like this. Right now it's black, and black wouldn't work, so you have to make sure that this is white. So you can use the text tool again, select all of this, and then go to the foreground color, double click in here and set this to white, so that now your text has become white. And then I usually, since I'm not sure if I want to reuse this file on a different computer, if it will actually have that typeface on there, I usually go to type and then, to layer, and then I say rasterize type, which actually turns the type in the layer into just a pixel-based image. And then you can save this, go to File, Save As, and I would recommend saving all of these files that you create with these transparency settings, so I call this milk new, as a Photoshop, a PSD file, which is lossless and has the best quality for your purpose. So this is the one thing. You can also then, of course, use selection areas, create, for example, additional elements on here, something like this, and then fill them with the color. So edit, fill with white, for example. So now I have this diamond shape, or this kind of triangular shape on the milk eye. I save this one more time, hit Apple S or File, Save in this case, and then bring this into my Premiere Pro composition. So I double click into an empty area in my project file, go to Milk New, import, okay, and then instead of the brain, so I'll delete that, and then I'll bring in the Milk New, the one that we just created in Photoshop, stretch this out all the way. So now you see, even with this little triangle that we added on to the text, it will show up as a part of the stencil.